There is something most people never stop to examine. A quiet pattern. A decision that gets made thousands of times across a lifetime, so automatically, so effortlessly, that it never feels like a decision at all. The pattern is this. When discomfort arrives, we leave. When resistance appears, we wait. When the moment demands something from us, we tell ourselves we will return to it later, and later becomes a week. A week becomes a year. A year becomes a decade, and somewhere in that passage of time, the person we were supposed to become is still standing at the starting line, waiting for conditions to improve. This is not a character flaw. It is not weakness in the way people typically mean that word. It is something more mechanical than that. The human mind is extraordinarily skilled at one specific task, protecting you from the pain that is in front of you right now. It is far less skilled at protecting you from the pain that will arrive quietly, years from now, when you realize what you chose not to do. That is the asymmetry worth understanding. Pain has a loudness to it. It announces itself. It makes itself known immediately. But regret is different. Regret does not knock, it accumulates. It settles into you slowly. The way dust settles into a room, invisible at first, then impossible to ignore, then simply part of the environment you live in. And here is what makes this dangerous. The mind never compares the two honestly. When you are standing at the edge of something difficult, a hard conversation, a training session, a commitment that requires sacrifice, the mind does a very specific calculation. It measures the immediate cost of action. The sweat, the awkwardness, the uncertainty, the discomfort of beginning. It feels all of that, magnifies it, and presents it to you as the full picture. What the mind does not measure at that same moment is the compounding cost of inaction. It does not show you the version of yourself 5 years from now who carries the weight of not going. It does not play out the arithmetic of what avoidance builds over time. So the comparison is never fair. You are comparing a real, felt, present pain against an abstract, unfelt future consequence. And of course, the future consequence loses every time because it is not in the room yet. Because it does not hurt yet. Because the version of you that will feel that regret does not exist yet, but it will. Think about what avoidance actually constructs. Not in dramatic terms, just analytically. Every time a person avoids the discomfort of physical training, the body responds accordingly. Strength is not lost in a single day. It erodes quietly. Mobility decreases. Energy decreases. The capacity to do things decreases. And years from now, that person is not simply less fit than they could have been. They are living inside a body that reflects the sum of every decision to avoid the short-term pain of effort. That is not a punishment. That is arithmetic. Every time a person avoids the discomfort of learning something difficult, a skill, a craft, a discipline, the gap between where they are and where they could have been grows silently. Skills compound. A person who commits to consistent effort for 5 years does not simply become marginally better than someone who does not. They become categorically different. The distance between them is not 5 years of effort. It is the compounding effect of 5 years of building on top of what was built before. Avoidance does not simply pause that process. It eliminates it. Every time a person avoids the discomfort of a hard conversation with a partner, a colleague, a parent, with themselves, the unresolved thing does not disappear. It occupies space. It shapes decisions. It colors relationships. It grows weight over time the way unaddressed problems always do. And the longer it waits, the more complicated it becomes, and the more courage is required to finally address it. Avoidance is not neutral. It is not simply the absence of action. It is the active construction of future difficulty. Every time a person avoids the moment that required courage to speak honestly, to pursue something uncertain, to stand for something uncomfortable, they teach themselves something. Quietly, without ceremony, they confirm an identity, not through a decision they announce, but through a decision they quietly make. And identity is not built in grand moments, it is built in the small ones, in the accumulated weight of every time you did, and every time you did not. This is how procrastination becomes something other than a bad habit. It becomes a self-concept. The person who avoids discomfort long enough eventually stops seeing the avoidance as a series of individual choices and starts experiencing it as simply who they are. I am not a person who wakes up early. I am not a person who disciplines their eating. I am not a person who finishes things. These statements do not begin as identity. They begin as behavior. And behavior, repeated consistently, regardless of intention, becomes identity. The mind is not asking whether you intended to become this person. It is simply updating its model of who you are based on what you consistently do. And this is where the real cost lives. Not in any single missed workout, not in any single avoided conversation, not in any single abandoned project. The real cost is in the person you do not become. The version of you that is capable, disciplined, confident, grounded in who they are. That version is not lost in one dramatic failure. It is quietly prevented from existing by the accumulated weight of small, reasonable feeling decisions to not do the hard thing today. The mind will always make those decisions feel reasonable. It is very good at this. It will give you a legitimate reason to rest today. A legitimate reason to start next Monday. A legitimate reason to wait until the timing is better, until you feel more prepared, until life settles down. And some of those reasons will even be true. But the pattern underneath the reasons is always the same. When something is hard, we find a way to justify not doing it. And that pattern, more than the specific reasons it generates, is what shapes the trajectory of a life. Now consider the opposite. Not the person who is never tired, never uncertain, never afraid. That person does not exist. Consider instead the person who understands the arithmetic, who recognizes that temporary discomfort and permanent regret are both forms of suffering, but only one of them produces something. The person who trains even when motivation is absent, not because they feel like it, but because they understand that feeling like it is not the prerequisite. The person who has the difficult conversation even when they would rather not, because they understand that the tension of avoidance is greater than the discomfort of honesty. The person who sits down to build the skill, to do the work, to stay with the process even when the process is unrewarding in the moment. This person is not living without pain. They are choosing which pain to carry. And they are choosing the pain that builds. They are choosing the pain that when it passes, leaves something behind. That distinction matters enormously. Discipline is not the absence of difficulty. It is the consistent willingness to meet difficulty without making an exception for today. And what discipline produces over time is not just competence. It is something quieter and more durable than competence. It is the knowledge that when something hard arrives, you will not leave. That knowledge changes how a person moves through the world. It changes the quality of their decisions. It changes the standard they hold for themselves. It changes what they are willing to accept and what they are no longer willing to tolerate. Confidence is frequently misunderstood. It is often treated as a starting condition, something you either have or do not have. Something that would make the action easier if only it were present. But confidence is not a prerequisite for action. It is a consequence of it. It is built through the accumulated evidence of having done the difficult thing and survived it. Every time you chose to stay when leaving would have been easier, you deposited something into your self-concept. Every time you followed through on a commitment to yourself, you built evidence that your word to yourself carries weight. That is what genuine confidence is. Not a feeling that something will go well. A history of having done difficult things regardless of how they felt. And that history is cumulative. It is not enough to have done the hard thing once. The mind updates its model of who you are based on what you consistently do. which means consistency is not just a strategy for achieving external results. It is the mechanism by which you change your own self-concept. The person you believe yourself to be becomes the person you act like. And the person you act like, over time, becomes the person you are. This is why the man who avoids discomfort today is not simply less productive than the man who does not. He is slowly constructing a different self. A self that confirms through behavior that comfort is what he values most. And that self will carry that confirmation into every future decision. Not because he is weak, but because his behavior has been teaching him who he is, and he has been learning the lesson. The man who accepts discomfort is doing the same thing in the other direction. He is constructing a self that has learned, through evidence, that difficulty is survivable. That temporary resistance does not mean stop. That the feeling of not wanting to do something is not a reliable indicator of whether it should be done. That the body's resistance to effort is not wisdom, it is mechanics. Delayed gratification is not a personality trait some people are born with and others are not. It is a practice. It is the repeated act of looking past the immediate feeling toward the longer consequence. And like any practice, it improves with repetition. The first time it is very hard. The 10th time it is somewhat hard. The 100th time it becomes a way of seeing. You begin to automatically translate short-term discomfort into its long-term meaning, and short-term comfort into its long-term cost. And once you can see that clearly, the calculus changes. Emotional control follows the same path. Not the suppression of emotion, not the pretense that the difficulty is not difficult, but the ability to feel the discomfort, recognize it accurately as temporary, and act regardless. That is not a natural state. It is a trained one. And it is trained exactly the way physical capacity is trained, by repeatedly doing what is hard until the capacity to do it expands. What does long-term vision actually mean? Practically, it means being willing to be uncomfortable in the present in exchange for a future state that you have judged to be worth it. It means operating from a version of yourself that does not yet exist, but that you are building toward. It means understanding that the actions of today are not evaluated in isolation. They are evaluated in terms of what they construct over time. Every decision is a vote for a version of yourself, and the votes accumulate. Pain is temporary, regret is forever. If you choose growth over regret, comment, no more excuses.